I'm here for the long game, and you don't emphasize the strategy in the long game by creating chaos and anger in the city. This is one Seattle where we listen to one another. And I ask those with perhaps intolerance of what you see, bear with me.
Well, that is Mayor Bruce Harrell defending what was, at least to homeless service providers, a surprise sweep of an encampment right outside of City Hall in downtown Seattle. What are the after effects of that move? What are we left with at the end of an action-packed legislative session? And what kind of a new development is coming to the First Hill neighborhood after an interesting maneuver from the Seattle City Council? Well, guess what? We're going to discuss those issues and a whole lot more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel here. The views expressed here are my own, and I am joined by David Kroman of the Seattle Times, transportation reporter there. And David, I'm not saying I enjoy it when we get things wrong, but when we were talking a couple weeks ago that it looked like we weren't going to have a baseball season at all, and now we actually have one, I'm kind of psyched about that.
Yeah, same, especially considering the rapid demise of the Seahawks' near-term prospects. It's nice to have a team that it might be going the opposite direction in theory. So
yeah. Oh man, here's hoping. Wait, I'm thank you for bringing it full picture there. I appreciate that, David. All right, well, thanks everybody for listening. As always, thank you, David, for joining me, and thanks to our patrons for keeping the show going. Hoping a few more of you can come on board and join our Mug Club at the $10 level. Our Mug Club members actually take up a cherished spot on our show with the Mug Shot of the Week. Patron Eric, once again, on the case. Some mug action photos. He's concerned about 2 homes in Wallingford getting torn down due to Seattle's housing affordability and livability agenda and replaced with multi-million-dollar townhomes. His quote, "Bad local government has real consequences." And Eric, thank you for sharing your opinion and sharing these photos too. If you do listen, folks, consider supporting the show on Patreon. Look for Seattle News, Views, and Brews while you're there. Also, check us out on Converge Media 2. The video version of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get her going with right here, right now. Well, David, a pretty big date this week, March 16th. That's when Mayor Harrell is asking most city employees to come back on the job in person. And as a part of that, the mayor is intent on removing encampments with homeless people around City Hall, as evidenced last week with the removal of a number of tents across the street from City Hall on 4th Avenue there. This happened last Tuesday. So, David, this was a situation that played out over about 2.5 weeks. You had these Stop the Sweeps activists protesting there. When the camp got a notice to vacate on February 20th, some of those activists started staying at the camp and shift to prevent people from being moved. But with city employees coming back on the job this week, I think the mayor made his decision, and with just a few hours' notice, not the customary 48 hours to get these camps cleared out, he made the move here. What do you make of this clearing out of these camps? What does this say to you?
Yeah, in some ways, it's interesting to me that this particular, I mean, I think this is getting attention because of its location.
Right outside City Hall, yeah.
Fairly large. At the same time, at least pre-pandemic, this was a really common thing, actually, this sort of no-notice removal of tents from the sidewalk. I mean, specifically, I'm thinking of the kind of Yesler Street overpass on 4th, you know, that if you looked at the schedule of the, you know, former navigation team, they would go to this location almost every day and move camps without any notice under the sort of obstruction exemption from the 48-hour notice rule. And so, you know, this is kind of falling in what at least pre-pandemic was like a pretty standard thing to happen, which isn't to comment necessarily on its, you know, value or utility or whatever it might be, but it was a common thing that happened. And so I think what's notable about this was, you know, its proximity to City Hall, its size, and sort of a signal that the kind of pause on these kinds of removals during the pandemic is clearly disappearing. And then, of course, every time one of these happens, it raises the question of, like, I mean, does it fix anything? I mean, where are these people going? Are they staying there? Are they just going somewhere else? Is their situation actually being improved? And I think, you know, that it is a question we ask every time when one of these happens.
Remains to be seen. And I think about this. The mayor's office said there were 16 people roughly in this camp here. 7 of them accepted offers of shelter. So I don't know exactly how you look at that number here. But one piece of it that really interests me, David, is just the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, which is supposed to be coordinating a lot of these efforts. From what I've seen in reports, they didn't know about this. They didn't know about this sweep, and they didn't support it either. I'm trying to figure out how that relationship goes forward with the city of Seattle and the KCRHA, because moments like this can be very difficult in terms of the optics of how Seattle deals with homelessness.
Well, and this was a conversation early on when the Regional Homelessness Authority was being set up in the first place.
Right.
Was that Seattle was going to retain, again, it was kind of the navigation team at the time.
Yes.
Changed incarnations a few times and names,
right.
But Seattle, it was clear from the beginning, was going to retain this ability to do these kinds of encampment clearing. So it's not, at least my understanding is, it's not like any specific rule was broken, but it does expose, the challenges of Seattle retaining some of what its previous response to visible homelessness under this new authority. And Mark Dones, the CEO of the Regional Homelessness Authority, has made clear that they are interested in, kind of laser focused and only interested in permanent housing and permanent solutions to homelessness. And Dones does not see this, my understanding, as kind of falling under that.
Yeah. And I guess just looking at that, I know Dones is also laser focused on downtown Seattle, just got a lot of money from a number of different benefactors in the business community. They're saying, all right, we want you to really focus on downtown Seattle. I just wonder how Mark Dones' vision really dovetails with Mayor Harrell's vision, because I don't know, when you see a sweep like this happen, I worry, and I'm concerned about that work that they're going to do together, these two governmental agencies.
Yeah, I don't know how it'll play out long term.
Yeah.
Again, this used to be literally a daily thing that was happening, and so it's not a novel approach that the city of Seattle is taking. But it is, when there's a new mayor, I think there's always kind of renewed scrutiny on best practices. And then, as I mentioned before, there was this kind of pause in these sorts of operations during the pandemic. So, I think it does make, its location and, as you mentioned, the return to work of city employees, I think it makes sense that it's getting renewed scrutiny. At the same time, it should be noted, this is, until recently, this was the status quo. This was a daily thing that the city of Seattle was doing. And so, maybe people's patience are running out, because obviously the problem is as bad as it's ever been.
Right. This is a big part of the platform that Mayor Bruce Harrell said that he ran on that got him elected. So it's important to keep that in perspective too. Thanks for breaking down those pieces here with me here, David. I wanted to move on to the City Council, which will no doubt have a few discussions about these sweeps over the course of this week, but they're also working on a number of interesting issues. You got City Light transferring some archaeological artifacts found during some of the work on the Skagit River to the care of the Upper Skagit tribe. That's an interesting sidebar here. There's a zoning issue too we're going to tackle towards the end of the show, but I wanted to focus on something, David, the Transportation Committee is taking up this week, something called the Seattle Transportation Plan. So if you're keeping score at home, folks, this was part of the council's budget for the Seattle Department of Transportation from last year. There was a proviso saying we're going to spend $2.5 million on an integrated transportation plan. So it's a 20-year plan. It's a new outreach tool, I guess you'd say, intended to provide access for everyone to safe, efficient, affordable options to reach places and opportunities. David, I know you cover a lot of different transportation issues. Is this a plan on top of a plan, on top of another plan, or what do you make of this STP, if you will, the Seattle Transportation Plan?
Yeah, I do think, at least at this point, it is mostly a plan for a plan, which is fine. I mean, that happens. That's how these things work in government, especially when you're talking in decades. And again, it's early in Mayor Harrell's tenure, so you wouldn't expect too many, massively specific things. The one thing that stands out to me, and he said this early on, is this: he is talking about really increasing kind of outreach and conversation, which can mean, on the one hand, he's coming at it from an approach of trying to, fold in more underrepresented voices, more people of color, communities of color into the conversation around transportation.
Right.
On the other hand, I think some folks will see this as more Seattle process. It's not like SDOT does not do outreach. They do outreach, and
they do.
And so, I think it remains to be seen exactly what he means by that. But, if you look at the Seattle Transportation Plan, a lot of it is saying, we're going to do a lot of outreach around what the next few, many years under Seattle transportation should look like.
And it's interesting, too, just to jump in here, David. I mean, I know the mayor is still working on finding a director of SDOT, so that's part of the equation here, too. And then in looking at this transportation plan specifically, I was very interested in the engagement and information gathering is actually compensated to different community-based organizations or community liaisons. That engagement piece is compensated at a $5,000 level. Then larger efforts to get partnerships and policy recommendations, that's compensated at a $30,000 level. So this is where it gets a little interesting, right? When you start attaching a money figure to it. I just wonder what kind of organizations are going to be involved and what this outreach is going to look like.
Yeah, I don't know the answers to those. Of course, one can understand the thought behind that is to get community voices as best as possible. And existing community organizations have access to that. At the same time, I think we saw this a little bit with some of the police stuff after the summer of 2020, which is it is not a slam dunk to bring in folks and community organizations who have not done this work before to do this work. It can get complicated really quickly, and you get a lot of there becomes a lot of process. You're talking about complicated contracts and deliverables and accountability, and that can be tough.
It can, and it can lead to some political rancor too. I think you might be referring, at least in part, to you've got the mayor who was working on her, Mayor Durkin at least at the time, who was working on her Equitable Communities Initiative. Remember that, the ECI? And then you had the Seattle City Council working on a separate piece here with the Black Brilliance Project, which had a lot of different boondoggles involved there with its financing or whatever else. So I think you're right. This whole process of outreach, it's difficult to pin down exactly what that looks like and what that means, and trying to make sure that the mayor and the council are on the same page when it happens, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a really complicated thing to know who is speaking for the community. I mean, it's and I think that's why the police stuff became so complicated is because we saw pretty quickly that when Mayor Durkin established her task force, there was a quick response from some folks that said, well, those people don't actually speak for me. They don't speak for the whole community. And
that's right.
So that's, that's what I guess meant when I'm saying, on a, sort of broader level, of course, you can understand wanting to have input from the community. It does get complicated because you have to define who the community is and who speaks for that community. And more often than not, the community is many things and believes many things and wants many different things. And so I think that's where some of the fears come in of, when you talk about increasing process and conversation and community outreach, is that going to lead to delays? And I mean, it's clearly, we just saw the deadliest year in 15 years in Seattle on the streets. And it's clearly an urgent time to be thinking about transportation and mobility. And I think for some folks, there's concerns that the process could be too slow at a time when the needs are fairly urgent.
It's a great point. And this is the constant wrestling match for our city leaders, isn't it? Trying to deliver things quickly, but make sure that the process is proper and takes in a lot of different perspectives. Well, David, I thank you for breaking that down. And we'll keep an eye on what's happening with that transportation plan as we move forward here. But up next, we're going to take a final look at the 2022 legislative session in Olympia. What happened when the smoke finally cleared here? Quite a bit, actually. We're going to take a look at the highs and lows coming up on Now Hear This. Well, folks, it was a whirlwind of a legislative session in Olympia, and it's always interesting to watch the coordination of the simultaneous gavels in the State House and Senate to end things. TVW did its best to cover the moment back on March 10th, the final day of the session here. Here's what it sounded like.
The 2022 regular session is adjourned. Sine die.
Senate is adjourned. Sine die.
Well, a lot of cheering there, and if you're wondering, folks, the traditional Latin pronunciation would be sine die, without a day, signaling the end of the session, but we'll let them say it however they want to. They got her done here, and it didn't go into overtime. But, David, I'm just kind of looking past these cheers here. Our Democrat majority legislature revised its budget to $64.1 billion, an increase of $5 billion in spending that is unprecedented for a supplemental year. I want to get to the transportation package at the end of the show, but just looking big picture here, were you surprised by that amount of spending?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people were probably surprised by the amount of spending. I mean, the forecast at the early part of the pandemic was that overall revenues would drop because of economic hits, but that hasn't turned out to be true. Repeatedly, the forecasts have come in higher than expected, and this session was no different. So then the question became, how do you what should the legislators do with that amount of money? The Republicans wanted more sales tax cuts to happen.
Tax holiday, you bet.
Yeah, exactly. And Democrats didn't do that. Instead they saw that they had a lot of priorities that they wanted to be fulfilled, and they were handed a fairly good sized check, and they were going to spend it, and that's what they did.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know your colleague Danny Westney was talking about this in the Times. Democrats have actually pushed spending for the general state budget up 50% from $42.7 billion in 2017 to the $64.1 billion that we have right now. The state's population increased about 6% during that current time span. So just trying to provide some perspective on the dollars there. It's interesting to look at that. But David, I just wanted to touch on a few more issues here. We talked about police reform a couple weeks ago here. The state did a number of tweaks on that to make sure those laws really take effect, and there's buy-in from police departments on there. You've got wage protections for Uber and Lyft drivers. We talked about that too recently. But one bill that got through was a big one for gun restrictions. This bill that bans the manufacture, sale, or distribution of gun magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, making our state one of 9, in addition to the District of Columbia, where these kinds of regulations are in effect. I know Attorney General Ferguson has been working on this issue for many, many years here. Is this another example of Democrats trying to make some moves while they still hold a majority? I know we've touched on that. How do you look at this?
Yeah, maybe. Although, as you said, I think it's not a new priority.
Yeah.
But there just, I guess, happened to be momentum behind it this year. The this legislature, as we saw, nothing is ever a sure thing, even if it has support. Sometimes the clock just runs out on stuff. And so, I think this has been a thing that Democrats have wanted to do for a while. And maybe you're right. Maybe because, they understand that it could be a hard year for Democrats. And so maybe this is something that kind of rose to the top of the pile.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see. I mean, you've got all 98 House seats up for bid this year, up for election. You got about half of the state's 49 state Senate positions up as well. Just briefly on this as we wrap up this topic, some interesting departures, I thought, David, from the state legislature. Reuven Carlisle and David Frocht out of Seattle are not going to be running again. And then you've got, on kind of either ends of the spectrum, you've got Representative Jesse Johnson, who worked on so much of the police reform legislation. He's not going to run again from the 30th district. And then you've got Tim Sheldon from the 35th district, who's been there literally forever, more than 30 years here. He out of the Potlatch area there in the 35th. Any thoughts here on some of these different people leaving? It just feels like a lot of familiar faces are not going to be running again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for Frocht and Carlisle, that's not going to change the balance of power in Olympia because they're from Seattle. Yeah. The question there, though, is that's almost certainly going to be a kind of left versus slightly further left,
even lefter
race. And so that'll be kind of interesting. I would say, especially with Reuven Carlisle, that could, because he has been sort of an advocate for incrementalism and slow plotting progress reform. And compromise, and so that would be a shift in balance if, say, somebody more to the left of him, Jesse Johnson, similarly, not whoever replaces him, not going to change the balance of power. Tim Sheldon is interesting though because he's technically a Democrat, but has caucused with the Republicans, and so that whoever replaces him, that has a chance to. I'm not a super in the weeds on the politics of this, from my understanding is that has a chance to sort of actually have an impact down in Olympia. It could.
It looks like there's a Republican candidate who is working on entering that race. So we'll see. That'll be an interesting one to track down there in the 35th. But I wanted to talk about another issue here, David, as we work through. There's an issue on the full council's plate this week where they're talking about something that I found fascinating here, transferring development rights from landmarked properties to allow for taller buildings in the neighborhood. So the focus right now is on the Hotel Sorrento in the First Hill neighborhood, 9th and Terry. It's a 7-story building, been around since 1909, but it's in a neighborhood commercial zone for the city, the NC3 200, if you're wanting to know that one. The commercial area along Madison is actually the only area in the city mapped with that zone. So bottom line, I'm looking at this in kind of the bigger picture here, David. The Sorrento isn't usually using the additional height. So the idea is let's transfer it to other buildings nearby, let them get up to 350 feet high, but they do have to be on the same block, the city is saying, and you cannot transfer more than 110,000 square feet of space. I just find this to be a very interesting way to leverage landmarked properties to allow for more height. I know this happens in other parts of the city, but downtown specifically here. But how do you look at this? Any concerns about what the city is working on here from your perspective?
Well, yeah, it's fairly new to me. I hadn't really heard of this approach before. I'd be curious to know if other cities do this, kind of even where this idea came from. From what I'm gathering, it seems like in some ways this is kind of specifically targeted for the Sorrento.
Yes.
Because they've got that parking garage like right across the street, and so it falls very specifically in the parameters of this this legislation. And so, I don't know what kind of broader repercussions this would have. And not saying it won't. I just genuinely don't know because it's a fairly novel approach to me.
I feel the same way, and it sounds like there's a possibility of other landmark buildings in that same area. So I think the city council is looking for just about any way that it can to try to look at some of these different ways to add more density, et cetera. And I don't know, this is going to be an interesting one to track down because potentially this is something that could be happening on a citywide basis. What does that look like? Well, the Land Use Committee is going to be talking about it this week, folks, and we'll keep tabs on what's going on there. But an interesting twist for sure. All right, we need to start wrapping up here, but I want to figure out what really happened with that state transportation package. What are we getting for those $17 billion roughly that have been invested in this? David's got a few answers. It's time for Transportation Talk. Well, David, you have been covering the heck out of the state's transportation package just passed last week. I wanted to put a final focus on this. I know we've been looking at different pieces on this, but can you give us that big picture? What are we getting for this nearly $17 billion plan? There's one important piece, I suppose, here. We are not getting a new gas tax as we have with these types of plans in the past.
Yeah, no increase in gas tax. I mean, there is still a gas tax, but it's just not going to go any higher.
Right.
The a couple big ticket items. I mean, it kind of bookends a lot of projects that were promised in earlier sessions, but that turned out to be more expensive than legislators had guessed. So I'm thinking specifically Highway 520 and 405, and some fairly major projects there. It puts a lot of money toward, it puts $1 billion towards building a new I-5 crossing towards Oregon, which is interesting because that kind of has to be coordinated with Oregon legislators. So there's some fairly major highway projects, expands Highway 18, new trestle on Highway 2, so some, kind of traditional stuff that you would expect to see in a transportation package, which is, or we have in the past, like a lot of spending on big highway projects. But then what's kind of different about this one is, it was done exclusively by the Democrats.
I was going to say, there was not a lot of bipartisan support, if any, for what was going on here.
And interestingly, the Democrats didn't dispute that. I mean, the Republicans said, we weren't included in this. And Democrats said, well, there are good reasons why we didn't include you in this. So they were sort of unabashedly partisan about this, which means I think that you see, when you have Senator Marco Elias, who's and Representative Jake Fye, who are the kind of two leaders on this in the House and Senate, both of them are quite pro-transit, and you see that reflected in the budget, $3 billion for expanding transit service in a package, which is not something we have seen from past transportation packages before. And $150 million towards kind of studying high-speed light rail. And then there's, a lot of it also is fulfilling obligations. I mean, almost $3 billion for fixing fish culverts, which the state is mandated to do. And so, I think in past transportation packages, you see these sort of a little more kind of horse trading happening to win support. Someone's got some very hyper-specific project in their town that they want funded, and they'll kind of tie their vote to it. We didn't really see that as much this time. I mean, there are pet projects, but a lot of the projects, a lot of what defines this transportation package is really massive investments in large-scale projects.
Right. But mainly on the west side of the state, I know that was a criticism too.
Yeah, it was west side of the state heavy. The Democrats say, well, we also put $3 billion in here for preservation and maintenance, and that will help people on the east side of the state. But it is, again, not necessarily something that Democrats denied. But, when you look at the ferries, for example, Senator Christine Rolfes, who's from Bainbridge Island, said, well, yeah, we're spending a lot on the west side of the state and specifically on ferries because past legislatures have ignored ferries, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in. So, interesting that it became such a kind of firebrand piece of legislation when past transportation packages have not as much. I mean, not a single Republican voted for it.
Right.
And then, as far as I could tell, all Democrats voted for the spending side of it. A couple voted against the revenue side of it.
Okay.
So quite partisan, but also, I think we will see. I think the thing that we will see immediately in the short term is free transit for people 18 and under. That's kind of because a lot of these projects are going to take a long time to unfold, but that was the piece that they included because they clearly wanted to point to something right away to see that it made a difference. So, $17 billion over 16 years. It's quite a bit of money.
Yeah, and they're calling it transformational. We will have to see how that plays out. But just to wrap up here, David, I got to talk about one of the hottest pieces of transportation news you've been covering over the last week. You tweeted, "I know we'll be back to normal when I can drink a beer on the ferry again." You nearly broke the internet when you put that out there. Is there an update on the beer ferry situation? You got any news on this one? Because
I don't.
Yeah. Oh no. Okay.
I don't have any news. Although I feel like this could be a story that could go big for me. I don't know. Maybe. I should probably look into it.
Within reason. There's only so much research you can do on this, David. Be careful. Yeah.
I think it's a little complicated because it's like it's not like it's Washington State Ferries who are selling you beer. It's like a contractor who works on the ferry who sells you beer. Right. So I don't know what the state of those contracts are. I have done zero research on this, but
I see.
Except for my own kind of emotional longing to sit and drink a beer in the galley of the ferry.
It is nice to do. Throw a cup of chowder, maybe some popcorn in the mix there. It's a nice way to relax. But please do all these things, including reporting responsibly, David. So I want to make sure that we cover that. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me on the show. Thanks to everybody listening out there. Thanks especially to our patrons. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. The podcast is on all the major platforms, wherever you might listen. Again, please do support our show on Patreon. That is always definitely appreciated. Thanks for watching on Converge Media 2. We will see you soon. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.